4,500 years ago, right on the shore of the Red Sea, an official named Merer sits down at dawn over a sheet of papyrus. He keeps something like a delivery logbook. His crew is about 40 men, and they sail back and forth over and over, along one single route, from the quarry at Tura, where they cut the white, expensive limestone, to a site his journal calls the Horizon of Khufu. This stone becomes the white casing of the most famous structure in the whole world, and Merer notes every bit of it down, meticulously. Day 25. Inspector Merer spends the whole day out with his crew, hauling stone, and at night they sleep in South Tura. Day 26. Inspector Merer sets out once again from Tura with his crew. Loaded down with stone, he sails toward the Horizon of Khufu. And that's exactly how he records it page by page. When it comes to the pyramids, there's one question that always comes up. How did people with no cranes and no machines lift blocks as heavy as a car dozens of meters up into the air and then go and do it over 2 million times? The answer to that question already exists. It's written down, and it's about as down to earth as it gets. And yet the whole world still acts as if this were some great riddle that nobody has ever managed to solve. March 2025. 2 Italians come out with a claim that instantly goes completely viral. Corrado Malanga, a retired chemist, and Filippo Biondi, an engineer in radar technology, claim that satellite radar let them scan the ground beneath the Pyramid of Khafre, and that hidden under it is an underground city reaching almost 650 meters down. Claims like this spread across the internet in a flash. TikTok picks it up, then Facebook, and then a few days go by and the whole story slowly starts to fall apart. Zahi Hawass, the most recognizable Egyptologist in the world, writes this on his Facebook page. The rumors about columns under the Pyramid of Khafre are nothing but fabrications, spread by people who know nothing about Egyptian civilization or the history of the pyramids. And he adds that no permit was ever issued to work inside the pyramid, no radar was ever used in there, and no mission is operating at the site. The experts pile on here, adding that the satellite radar this whole sensation rests on can only see a few meters underground at the very most. There's no way on Earth it scans through solid rock hundreds of meters deep. That's just physically impossible. And what does Biondi have to say to all this? Answering the accusations, he writes, the term impossible does not apply once objective proof appears. He adds that his data points to structures belonging to an unknown civilization, one invoked in ancient myths all over the world. So what's missing from Biondi's answer here? Well, exactly that, the proof. Because in the end, he shows nothing at all that anyone can actually verify. All he says is this: I have my proof, so it must be true. And under heavy fire from the experts, his structures from a radar reading suddenly turn into a whole lost civilization. The harder they pushed him, the more elaborate his story became. And I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. Maybe some alien civilization really did help build the pyramids. Before we go any further, there's something I want to show you. Easter Island, those giant stone heads, each weighing dozens of tons. And for years, there was this theory floating around that no human strength could ever move them, so they had to be aliens. And then the archaeologists went and did a very simple thing. They wrapped ropes around a copy of one statue and walked it upright, rocking it from side to side, step by step, exactly the way you'd move a heavy refrigerator. I bring this up as a reminder that usually, when something looks impossible for people from the past, it's not a miracle. We're just missing the idea of how they did it, and that idea almost always turns out to be disappointingly down to earth. You'd think that selling mysteries is some invention of the internet. A simple modern way to rack up big views, but the mechanism behind it is much older than that. Let's go back about 3,200 years to one single man by the name of Ka-Mweset. He's a son of the pharaoh Ramesses II, and he does something no one before him had ever done on this scale. He walks among the crumbling monuments of the Old Kingdom, which even back then were already 1,000 years old, and he orders them repaired. He restores the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, the Pyramid of Menkaure at Giza, and the Step Pyramid of Hoser. He pulls a lost statue of one of Khufu's sons out of the rubble and ceremonially sets it up in a temple. Scholars today sometimes call him the very first Egyptologist, a man who treated these old monuments as monuments and not just as raw building material. Ka-Mweset leaves whole inscriptions behind him, something like the ancient version of museum labels, and on one of them, right by a tomb, he writes that he's restoring the erased name of a long-dead king, for his name could not be found. 1,000 years after these pharaohs, their monuments were already crumbling with age, and someone had to save them. Khaim Wesid did this out of a genuine love for the ancient past. He could read hieroglyphs without any trouble at all. But all kinds of people came through these ruins over time. They left their writing behind, the way a tourist today carves his initials into a monument, but they also simply made things up and added them right in. We have an exact record of one such moment. Let's jump ahead to the year 450 BC, so about 8 centuries later. A Greek traveler named Herodotus arrives in Egypt, and he's about to write down one of the first accounts of the pyramids in history. At the foot of the pyramid, a local guide walks up to him, points to an inscription on the casing, and reads it to his visitor. He says the writing records how much was spent on radishes, onions and garlic for the workers on the build. Around 1,600 talents of silver. Herodotus writes all of this down in detail, and that's how the number lands in his book, and for the next 2,000 years, everyone after him just repeats it. There's only one problem with that. Not one known Egyptian monument records the cost of vegetables on its wall. Herodotus was misled by a so-called translator who pretended to be reading the inscription, and instead of saying, "I don't know what this says," he just invents a story on the spot. Let's go right back to Merer's delivery journal, because it proves this whole build was an ordinary job. Counted down to the very last boat. And if it really was all that down to earth, then where exactly did the rams go? And where's the site where thousands of people lived and worked for 20 straight years? Let's start with the people. At the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, inside a glass case, stands a head carved from painted limestone. This man has a name, Ankhaf, a high official from the time of Khufu. We know about him because he shows up in Merer's journal. He managed the flow of stone. In 1988, Mark Lehner's team starts digging right next to the pyramids and uncovers something that the miracle stories almost always leave out: an entire city. Now, these weren't some dungeons for slaves, this was the whole backbone of the build, with bakeries turning out bread on a full industrial scale, with breweries, with barracks, and with a working harbor. A logistics machine that had to feed thousands of people every single day. Management at a level most companies today couldn't even handle. And let's add this on the side as well. These pyramids were not put up by slaves under the whip at all. That's a myth. Lehner's excavations point to somewhere around 20 to 25,000 workers in total. And on the walls, these men left the names of their own work crews. In the workers' cemetery beside the pyramids, researchers found skeletons with signs of healing, mended fractures, traces of surgery. The people who died on the job were buried with honor. Zahi Hawass put it in a single sentence: if these had been slaves, they would never have been buried in the shadow of the pyramids. Now let's move on to the build itself. First, let's talk about how all that stone even got there, because the answer from recent years is surprisingly simple. In 2024, a team led by Eman Gonaim published a paper with a simple, powerful title. The chain of Egyptian pyramids was built along a branch of the Nile that no longer exists today. The researchers laid geophysical data and satellite radar over a map and found a riverbed buried under the sand, a great dead river. It's the exact same kind of radar the Italians used to find that supposed city hidden 650 meters underground. The difference here is that this time around it was used honestly, to detect shallow traces just under the surface, which were then confirmed by actual drilling. They named this riverbed the Sharamat branch. It ran right along the foot of the desert plateau, exactly where most of the pyramids stand. We're talking about a riverbed roughly 64 kilometers long, and that completely changes the whole picture of the construction site. These pyramids have long stone causeways that run downhill and end at what we call the valley temples, and these temples stood right at the water's edge and could work as river ports. The water came in right up to the building site itself. And now let's picture this whole scene differently than the way it's usually painted for us. The block isn't dragged for kilometers across burning desert by a crowd of suffering slaves. The block arrives by boat, almost right up to the site itself, where the sleds are already waiting. Part of the so-called mystery of transport vanishes here in one sentence, because the desert through which these heavy stones were supposedly dragged back then did not yet exist in that place. Okay, so we have the stone on site, but how do you pull it up? And here comes the most common objection from all pop culture surrounding the pyramids. If there were rams, then where are they? There would be some traces of them after all. At first that really sounds like a knockout, but in reality it's a gap in the reasoning. We do know ramps, not from under the Great Pyramid, but from a quarry in Middle Egypt. In 2018, a joint mission of the University of Liverpool and the French Institute uncovered a beautifully preserved hauling system there, and crucially, one dated to the reign of Khufu, the very same Khufu who raised the pyramid at Giza. And this place isn't remarkable just because of the ramp itself. The Egyptologist Roland and March of Liverpool points out that the quarry preserved a huge number of inscriptions left by crews from 4500 to 4000 years ago, and these writings let us understand, in his own words, the personnel and the logistics of organizing expeditions like this. Here's what it looked like. Down the middle ran a ramp and, along its sides, 2 rows of posts driven into the ground. Ropes were tied to those posts, the sled carrying the block was hooked onto the ropes, and it was hauled upward, post by post, like a ski lift. And here comes the thing that shatters the myth of the impossible incline. This is how the Egyptians hauled blocks up slopes angled at 20% and more. And that's steep, far steeper than people believed for years. Let's stress it one more time. This isn't a ramp of the Great Pyramid, but of a quarry sitting several hundred kilometers away. But it is proof of something else, that the Egyptians under Khufu knew how to build steep hauling systems. This technology existed, it was mastered, and it left behind concrete traces you can actually dig up. So why then was no such ramp ever found under the pyramid itself? Mark Lehner said these were temporary ramps, built from materials that were less durable or could simply be reused. Once the ramps were no longer needed, they were taken apart and repurposed. Is the proof hidden here? No, but for most people, it's just boring. Loud, sensational stories reach the public far more easily.
Nie możemy łączyć się z obcymi cywilizacjami ani z aniołami.
A nie, absolutnie.
To są smoki, żmijosmoki. To jest bardzo trudny temat.
Fabus, nie potrafię, nie łapię tej kosmicznej gadki.
Before we go any further, let's sum up what we've got so far because we already know quite a lot. We have Merer's notes, the journal of where the stone came from and how it was carried. We have the dead river under the sand that delivered that stone by boat right to the site. And we have ramps from the time of Khufu. Proof that they knew how to haul heavy blocks steeply uphill. If the answer to how the pyramids were built is really this ordinary, then why are the experts still sitting over this pyramid? What's left that keeps the researchers up at night, the final 30 meters? The higher up you go, the less room there is. Any external ramp would have to vanish at exactly the moment it's needed most, right at the very top. Nobody here has the full answer. But real researchers, unlike the people who live off sensation, don't pretend that they do. You can see this best in one single man. Bob Breyer, an Egyptologist who for years backed one specific theory, that hidden somewhere inside the pyramid is a ramp used to carry the blocks up from within. He believed it strongly right up until 2017, when the pyramid was scanned, and by a method that sounds like pure science fiction. Mimeography works like an X-ray, except the rays here are particles falling onto the Earth from outer space. Where the stone is dense, more of them get stuck, and where there's empty space, they fly straight through. They are counted over months using detectors, and out of that, an image of the pyramid's interior slowly emerges. And these results didn't show any hidden ramp inside at all. Breyer bravely owns up to the mistake he'd been stuck in for years. And he says this data suggests there's no ramp, I think we lost. Making mistakes and being able to admit them is not a weakness. It's exactly the thing we will never once see in the people who sell sensation. That same mimeography from 2017 detected something else, a huge void, at least 30 meters across. The team wrote honestly, for now we have no information about the role of this void. There are a few down-to-earth interpretations, but somehow nobody plants a flag in their own view and says, I'm the one who's definitely right. And what does the other side do with that very same hole? The headlines scream, they found a hidden chamber, sealed it away forever, the truth being kept from the world. And an approach like that sells beautifully, because most of us want something fast and extraordinary, instead of the painstaking analysis that just raises more questions. The building method itself turned out to be down to earth, but that doesn't mean it was simple. Coordinating thousands of people, dozens of boats and stone deliveries right on time for some 20 years. That was an enormous undertaking, and here too comes the temptation to put one single brilliant mind behind it all, the one who designed the whole thing. In a German museum stands a limestone statue of Hem-I-Unu. He carried a title that sounds like a ready-made caption for a legend. Overseer of all the king's construction works, he belonged to the royal family, and this statue was found in his tomb. The popular story says, "Behold, the brilliant architect of the Great Pyramid." It sounds great, except there's one problem. In the museum descriptions, there's one word that very often disappears. Probably. It's a fact that Hem-I-Unu held the highest office and had a great tomb right beside the pyramid. What's only a guess though is that he was an architect in our sense of the word. And just like that, an official's title suddenly turns into a brilliant designer, and every new retelling skips over the doubt more and more. If we really want to see the face of this build, well, it does exist. It's just not what we'd like to find. Let's go back for a moment to Ankhaf, the one Merer described in his delivery journal as the man who ran the harbor and the whole flow of stone to the pyramid. He's the answer to this myth, because behind the building of the Great Pyramid there was no brilliant artist, just officials who made sure the boats kept sailing and the bread was on time. Why were pyramids even built in the first place? A pyramid was a pharaoh's tomb, and in people's eyes, the pharaoh wasn't an ordinary king. He was someone who, in his lifetime, already passed for a god in the flesh on earth. A pyramid was no ordinary grave. It was the heart of a great machine meant to turn a dead king into a god. The whole complex, the temple by the water, the stone causeway leading up from it, the temple at the foot of the pyramid, and the pyramid itself were all meant to work together as one great device for that transformation. We know this because the Egyptians wrote it down. In the Pyramid of Unas, the same one that Ka-Mweset restored late in his life, the oldest religious book in the world was carved. Hundreds of spells meant to lead the dead pharaoh upward into the sky to join the sun god. The pyramid was meant to make that journey possible. The shape alone is a strong clue here, because according to the Egyptian creation myth, the world began with a single mound that rose up out of the primeval sea, and the pyramid is exactly that first mound cast into stone. Its verite was also gilded, so it would catch the first rays of the rising sun. And it's not as if the pyramid shape was invented all at once. At first there was the low rectangular grave, the mastaba, and a few generations before Khufu, people began stacking these rectangular blocks one on top of another, each one smaller than the last. That's how the first pyramid was born, the step pyramid. Then came Sneferu, Khufu's father. Through trial and error, he learned to smooth the walls. One of his pyramids still stands today with a broken angle halfway up its height, because the engineers realized partway through that at the original incline the whole thing might collapse, and in a hurry they flattened the top. And at the very end of this road stands his son, Khufu, and everything his predecessors had learned converges into one single mass, 146 meters of smooth stone. This form was never a necessity, it was an evolution, a shape that grew, that matured, and a few generations later began to shrink, once both the resources and the will to keep dragging it onward ran out. The pyramid was the style of the era, the symbol of a state at the peak of its power, and yet someone came along who pushed back against it. January 2025. A few dozen kilometers from Giza, in an old burial ground at Saqqara, a Polish team of archaeologists descends into a great rectangular tomb. But this isn't a pyramid, it's a mastaba. The same rectangular block that started it all. Lying inside it is the last pharaoh of that very dynasty that raised the Great Pyramids at Giza, and he was the only one who built no pyramid. When the team began clearing the burial chamber, more than 1,000 fragments emerged from under the dust. The shattered sarcophagus of a king, the deputy mission director, Dr. Krzysztof Radke, put it this way. He decided he would not build a pyramid like his father, but a mastaba. So, an unusual decision. We'll try to establish why he did it. And if one pharaoh from that same dynasty looked at the pyramid and said no, then it probably means the pyramid wasn't a necessity, but a choice. Which leaves us with one question. Why exactly did he choose this way? The Great Pyramid was never a mystery. It was the best documented construction site of the ancient world. And all the rest is us, and our age-old need to turn something this human into something out of this world. In Japan, an employer measures his workers' waistlines, and if they cross the limit, the company pays fines in the millions. Every one of us has heard about slim, healthy Japan, but is it actually true? Click the thumbnail and see why Japan isn't nearly as slim as you think. This is cold lemon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in just a moment.